now, once again, Raymond Arroyo.
Welcome back to The World Over. The 2016 presidential race tightened up this week with the gap between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump closing. All this just ahead of the Republican National Convention and Trump's VP pick this week. Joining us with her take is Republican pollster and political columnist for the Washington Examiner, KRISTEN Soltis Anderson. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Hey, I want to start and put these numbers up for everybody. This is the latest Rasmussen poll. Look at these. Well, these are both national polls, CBS, New York Times, and the Rasmussen numbers. Trump 44% to Clinton's 37% in Rasmussen. They're tied at 40% in the CBS New York Times poll. Now, the interesting thing here is the shift has happened. There's a gap closing. Why?
Over the last couple of weeks, the conventional wisdom has been that it's been Donald Trump that hasn't been having a good couple of weeks, that he's had a lot of controversies and things that have popped up, but that's sort of the default speed for him. Meanwhile, Hillary Clinton has been still fighting this challenge from Bernie Sanders, even though she has locked up essentially the Democratic nomination. And you, of course, had the story about the FBI and the investigation into her emails. While there was a recommendation that she not be charged, certainly James Comey had some tough words for Secretary Clinton's use of personal email. And so that's all brought back to the surface, this idea that Hillary Clinton can't be trusted. And that has really pulled her numbers pretty far down.
So you think that's what's affecting this slide?
That's been the biggest thing that's happened in the last couple of weeks that I think would affect her. The other thing that it could possibly be would be Americans finally beginning to sort of react again to these issues of violence that have occurred, whether it's the violence that's occurred in Dallas, the previous to that, the violence at Pulse nightclub in Orlando, with folks feeling like things are out of control and wanting someone who's a stronger leader. Donald Trump, in poll after poll, people think that he is strong as one of the attributes. So that could be something that's benefiting him now as well.
Let's talk about the gender gap, which we've heard and read a great deal about, but it may not be what people, or in the way people are portraying this. Look at these numbers from Rasmussen. Male among men, 53% for Trump, 32% for Clinton. Among females, 35% for Trump, 43% for Clinton. So Clinton leads by 8 points among women, but Trump has a 21-point advantage among men. Who has the real gender gap here?
The gender gap cuts both ways. And if you looked at, for instance, the exit polls in the 2014 midterm elections in, say, a state like Colorado, you saw the same thing. While the Democratic candidate might win women by a couple of points, the Republican candidate was winning male voters by double digits. This is sort of part of Donald Trump's strategy. He understands that whether it's women, Latinos, younger voters, these are groups that he might struggle with compared to the Democrats. But if he can really run up the score with men or white voters, can he offset that and wind up winning the election?
Are you surprised that we're seeing with Trump more likability than even with Mitt Romney?
So with Donald Trump, I think it depends a little bit on who you're asking about. I might disagree with you there, because poll after poll, I think, still does show that both Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton are significantly disliked by a majority of voters. Mitt Romney, even at sort of his worst point, wasn't really disliked strongly by a majority of voters. He might have been viewed in kind of a lukewarm fashion. This is an election that's depressing for a lot of voters, because both Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump are just viewed so negatively.
I want to look at these numbers in the major battleground states. Look at these. This is Quinnipiac. Florida, Trump's at 42, Clinton's at 39. Ohio, Trump's at 41, Clinton's at 41. Pennsylvania, Trump's at 43, Clinton's at 41. Now, since 1960, no one has won the presidency without securing at least 2 of those states. What does this tell you, and why do you see it tightening up so much in these battleground states?
Well, I think these battleground states are reflective in some way of this national dynamic of people wanting a stronger leader and having questions about trust in Hillary Clinton, her trustworthiness, her use of the email. But I think also, I mean, if you take a look at some of these states like Pennsylvania, Ohio, these are states that have a lot of working class voters who in recent years, you know, the economy hasn't necessarily worked out for them. And so at this point, it's almost like a game of 52 card pickup. Let's just throw everything out there and let's go for something that's completely different. And Donald Trump is something that's completely different.
Yeah. Let's talk about Bernie Sanders' endorsement of Hillary Clinton this week. Does that work? Does that move those hardcore Sanders voters into her column?
Well, it has to make things a little bit easier for her to not have Bernie Sanders himself creating problems for her. But for a lot of Bernie Sanders supporters, you know, Donald Trump tweeted out that this counted as Sanders selling out. Do they think that Bernie Sanders is actually selling out his own principles by doing this? I think for the most part, by the time you get to Election Day, if you're somebody who's very progressive, leans to the left, you're probably going to wind up being a Hillary Clinton voter. But right now, it's still that emotional time where people are still holding out hope that maybe Bernie Sanders will save the day.
There was a Pew survey that I thought very interesting. I know our viewers will as well. And it looked at Evangelical and Catholic voters and where they're falling. Evangelicals support Donald Trump 78%, which is astounding, really. The Catholics, and this is sort of amazing, given what we saw in some of the primary states. 19% of Catholics, only 19%, favor Trump strongly or support him, while 26% support Hillary Clinton strongly. What are we learning there? Why the reluctance?
Well, part of it is that it's the demographics of the Catholic vote. That for the evangelical vote, you overwhelmingly demographically are talking about a white population. That's where Donald Trump does very well. But in the United States, you have a very significant number of Latinos who are part of the Catholic community. And we know from other polling that Donald Trump struggles with the Latino community, that some of his rhetoric has been a bit off-putting. So that's part of it. And Democrats also tend to do better with Catholics than they do with evangelicals. So that's another factor that I think is feeding into those numbers.
Let's talk about this VP pick. We're assuming now that it's Mike Pence. If Mike Pence is indeed the pick, how does he impact these religious voters, those social conservatives who are a little leery of Donald Trump? Does this help?
I'm skeptical that vice presidential choices make a huge difference, unless it's a really splashy pick like a Sarah Palin. I think Mike Pence is probably the safest, least splashy pick that Donald Trump could choose. So I don't know that it actually changes that much. It may, if nothing else, put to rest concerns people might have that he is going to make some incredibly unorthodox or bizarre choice. It sort of takes that worry off the table and lets him move forward with the rest of the convention in a calmer sort of fashion.
Well, he's got foreign policy experience. He's an old hand on Capitol Hill. He's well liked here. He's not exactly the most charismatic guy. I mean, I think we can say that.
Correct.
He's a nice guy, but he doesn't quite have that punch. But maybe Trump figures he can bring that to the table. He doesn't need it. Now, the big question for some social conservatives, I've been hearing this all day, that Religious Freedom Restoration Act that he marched out, this was his big moment in the national spotlight. He bungled that moment.
And there's also questions from conservatives around the Common Core state standards, where Pence initially said we're going to get rid of Common Core in Indiana, but there have been questions about the new standards that have come out that look a lot like Common Core. So there are moments where he's been sort of a standard bearer for conservatives, but there are other things he's done that have raised questions. I don't think, however, that Mike Pence raises more questions than Donald Trump himself should raise questions with social conservatives.
As a pollster, when you look at this, when you see the trend lines, are they trackable? Do you see where this is tending or leading, or is this just one of those seasons where you throw your hands up?
Oh
and say,
gosh,
we
well,
don't
you
know?
know, things have been crazy, but if you actually looked at the polls during the primaries, the polls were telling us for a while that Donald Trump was likely to win. That a lot of the belief that, no, this could never happen, it wasn't the polls were wrong, it was that people didn't trust them. Now, if we look at what the polls tell us, they're telling us that we're in for a fairly close race, but ultimately, I always caution people, don't worry about the national polls. Just look at battleground state polls. And never panic about any one poll. Look at an average of all of them. Every so often, someone can get it wrong. But if you look at all of them together, they're usually telling a good story.
And they're telling you what now?
Right now, they're telling me that this is an America that's extremely divided, that you have a lot of people that have moved into their camps that think, I don't love my own candidate, but I could never vote for the other candidate. And so for those folks in the middle who just still haven't made up their mind, as always, they'll be the ones making the decision.
So this is a campaign that's going to be decided by negatives.
It is. You know, there's a question that always gets asked in the exit polls. Are you voting today because you support the candidate you voted for, or are you voting against the other candidate? It wouldn't surprise me to see record numbers of people on both sides saying their vote is mostly about voting against the other person.
Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Analysis. You can follow KRISTEN Soltis Anderson's columns by visiting Washington Examiner at WashingtonExaminer.com.